Hello, everyone. There have been 118 femicides in Greece from 2015 to 2020, and this year alone, we know of 11 such crimes. A shocking statistic that has been around for years, of course, and that's on top of millions of women subjected to violent domestic abuse in Europe. According to the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, about 13 million women have been victims of physical violence in the European Union, and a total of 3.7 million women have been victims of sexual violence. These are very disturbing facts, and here on CNN Greece, we want to get a sense of the extent of the problem and get answers that will help create a better framework of actions to prevent this violence, protect the victims, and punish the perpetrators. I am happy to be joined today by Dr. Alice Han. Dr. Han, hello. I'm just going to briefly say you're a Canadian obstetrician and a gynecologist, former instructor at the Harvard Medical School and currently conjoint lecturer at the University of New South Wales School of Population Health. You have a global health background, and your research focuses on the intersection of violence against women, reproductive health outcomes, and health system response. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Christos.
To begin with, tell us briefly what femicide is, how big is a problem of violence against women, and why have you referred to it as a disease pandemic?
Caroline Crouch's murder by her pilot husband in May woke Greece up to femicide, which is the murder of a woman. Femicide differs from male homicide in specific ways. For example, most cases are committed by current or former partners and involve ongoing domestic abuse, threats, sexual violence, or situations where women have less resources or power than their partners. There are different types of femicide. Caroline lost her life to intimate femicide, which is committed by a current or former partner and accounts for over 35% of all murders of women globally. Other types include dowry-related killings by in-laws of newly married women and honor-related killings by a family member for transgressions like pregnancy outside of marriage. Caroline's femicide is an extreme form on the spectrum of violence against women, which is a massive problem. Violence against women can be physical, sexual, or psychological. In Greece, 1 in every 4 women experience physical and or sexual violence in their lifetimes. Globally, 1 in every 3 women, that's more than 1 billion people, are harmed by this violence in their lifetimes. This violence erodes economies. The burden in Greece is estimated at $2.4 billion per year. The problem is devastating and it's widespread, which is also how one could describe the COVID-19 pandemic. But unlike COVID-19 saturation of the global consciousness, violence against women remains a largely silent issue. It's time for a paradigm shift. I'm trained as both a medical doctor and an epidemiologist, which is a public health scientist that studies patterns of disease. Disease shapes how I think about public health problems and their solutions. A disease is an abnormal condition with a cause that affects an organism. The abnormal condition here is the violence. Unlike COVID-19's virus, the root causes of violence against women are sociopolitical, like gender inequality. But ideas are contagious and they spread. And so violence against women can spread like a virus through cultures and countries. What COVID-19 has clearly shown us is that the world can mobilize quickly to understand and curb a pandemic. We can produce scientific evidence on the virus, promote interventions like face masks to stop its spread, and accelerate the development and distribution of vaccines. So just as the world has responded to COVID-19, let's reframe violence against women as a pandemic to highlight the urgency of a global commitment to address it. We have evidence-based solutions that can reduce it. What we need is the investment of resources and application of scientific evidence to coordinate accelerated global action.
Of course, here in Greece, we have been appalled with these crimes, Caroline Crouch's being one of them. Why are stories like this one keep on happening?
Femicide and violence against women is rooted in gender inequality. Gender equality is a human right, and it was declared a core principle in the United Nations Charter in 1945. But today, 76 years later, it's still not yet achieved. So I've trained and worked as a doctor globally in health centers in Kenya, Israel, and Brazil, to the villages of Rwanda. And I've seen gender inequality manifest in different ways, like women needing permission of their husbands to access contraception. Socially, I've seen adults praise young girls for looking pretty, while praising young boys for what they accomplish. Gender inequality exists around the world in different ways. Through a legal lens, in 1979, the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, considered an international bill of rights for women. It outlined national responsibility for legislation to guarantee gender equality. But today, 42 years later, over 2.5 billion women and girls still live in countries with at least one gender discriminatory law, which restricts their decisions on marriage, divorce, and jobs. Furthermore, 1 in 4 countries still have no laws on domestic violence. Through an economic lens, less than 2/3 of women worldwide are in the labor force, compared with 93% of men. And over half of these women are in the informal economy, working on low wages and without social protection. Politically, men dominate power and decision-making. They hold 3/4 of seats in parliaments. Health-wise, sexual and reproductive rights are still unattainable for women. In 2019, 190 million reproductive age women who wanted to avoid pregnancy did not use contraception. So this highlights significant gaps in access to education and health services. So Christos, let's focus on Greece. The 2021 World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Index benchmarks national gender gaps among economic, political, educational, and health criteria. Of 156 countries in the index, where do you think Greece ranks? It ranked 98th overall. In recent years, Greece has been the lowest ranking country within the European Union, with one of the lowest rates of women's employment, persistent gender pay gap, and absence of women in leadership roles. And let's not forget COVID-19's impact. In Greece, calls to a crisis helpline for women experiencing violence increased dramatically by 51% between 2019 and 2020. Greece's lockdowns have increased a woman's risk of violence for several reasons, like isolation with family, decreased access to social networks, compounded with stressors of economic and job losses. So COVID-19 has exacerbated what was already one of the largest scale human rights violations.
It's needless to say that when such a crime happens, the fundamental rights of dignity and equality are violated. But when we talk consequences, Dr. Han, how far do they go and how much do they change the way we interact?
The consequences of violence against women are significant in scope and severity. And I can mention just a few of them. It harms women's physical, mental, sexual, and reproductive health, with serious outcomes like traumatic brain injury, depression, sexually transmitted infections like HIV, and unwanted pregnancy. In extreme cases like Caroline Crouch, it can result in death. Unborn children and pregnant women experiencing violence can also be harmed through increased risk of preterm birth, low birth weight, and fetal death. Violence against women also has staggering economic costs. For example, in the United States, the lifetime cost of rape for all reported survivors is nearly $3.1 trillion. The consequences profoundly change how we live our lives. So they can harm men across generations. Boys who witness their fathers abusing their mothers are more likely to be abusive in their own relationships. They can negatively impact a woman's health and well-being across the lifespan. And how can we possibly summarize the extraordinary impact on Caroline Crouch's child and all of the other children who lose a mother to femicide? Or how can we quantify the lost human and economic potential of the 1 billion women who have experienced violence?
And finally, let me ask you what most people really want to know. I believe I'm speaking for everyone who's watching right now. How do we prevent, Dr. Han, stories like Caroline Crouch's from happening?
We work to eradicate the root causes behind these stories: gender inequality. The World Economic Global Gender Gap 2021 report predicts the inequality gap will not close for 136 years. You and I will not experience a world of gender equality, but we need to work so that the next generation will. As we have done for the COVID-19 pandemic, we want to mitigate the risk factors that increase the risk for violence against women, and we want to amplify the protective factors that protect against it. And we need to consider all levels, from the level of the individual to the interpersonal to the community, and most broadly to the societal level. For example, at the individual level, attitudes that justify violence as acceptable is a risk factor, while socializing boys, men, women, and girls to hold gender equitable attitudes is protective. Other risk factors include male-controlled interpersonal relationships, community-level poverty, drugs and alcohol, and societal-level gender discrimination in institutions like police and health systems that do not respond to violence against women like we need them to. The factors that buffer against these and protect against violence against women are interpersonal relationships with shared decision-making and household responsibilities, community norms that promote women's empowerment, and societal level laws that protect against violence against women and promote gender equality and access to formal employment. So let's turn now to the very heart of our conversation, the solutions. What can we do to prevent stories like Caroline's from happening? I want to turn now to a new framework that was developed by the World Health Organization and United Nations Women in 2019 and endorsed by 12 other UN agencies and bilateral partners. It's called the Respect Women Framework, RESPECT. Each letter stands for one of 7 strategies to prevent violence against women. So let's go through each. R, relationship skills strengthened through improving skills in interpersonal communication, conflict management, and shared decision making. Examples are couple therapy or group-based workshops with men and women to promote egalitarian attitudes in relationships. E, empowerment of women, so both economically and socially, including inheritance and asset ownership, and mentoring to build skills in assertiveness, negotiation, and self-confidence. S, services ensured, including police, legal, health, and social services provided to survivors. So examples include alcohol misuse prevention interventions, shelters, hotlines, and women's police stations and units. P, poverty reduced through strategies like cash transfers, microfinance loans, and labor force interventions like employment policies and training. E, environments made safe, implementing interventions in schools, public spaces, and work environments. C stands for child and adolescent abuse prevented through establishing nurturing family relationships, prohibiting corporal punishment, and implementing parenting programs. Examples include school-based rape and dating violence prevention strategies and training. And finally, the last letter and strategy, T. That stands for transformed attitudes, beliefs, and norms. We do this through strategies that challenge harmful gender attitudes and beliefs that uphold male privilege and female subordination that justify violence against women. So these can range from public awareness campaigns to group education with men and boys to change attitudes. So Christos, this is an exciting framework that supports the paradigm shift we need. We need to see violence against women as a problem we can reduce through the design and implementation of evidence-based national and subnational policies, programs, and interventions. Let's think, how would Caroline's story have ended differently had these 7 strategies been implemented? So here's my bottom line, Christos. Violence against women is preventable, and the time for change is now.
It's true. It's high time we mobilized every form of power, starting from the power of education, of course, and move on to the power of justice, and even further, the power of solidarity and that of culture, to make sure no woman is left behind and alone in this. Dr. Han, thank you so much for your scientific contribution in today's stream from CNN Greece, and greetings from Athens.
Thank you.